TV shows based on movies, toys based on movies, games based on movies, and rides based on movies. I'm your host, Mr. CCS, and these are my pets, George the Gorilla, Kahala the Dolphin, and Frank the Sea Turtle. You might be wondering why I'm dressed like this. Well, I'm kind of in disguise in my incognito place because, well, they're right outside the window, and I cannot have them finding me. Whatever the case is, I have a job to do. You know, with this season of the show, I've been able to talk about movies I've never seen, given a chance to talk about ones I have, and also revisit things I haven't seen in a long time. Today, I'm going to revisit a movie that I have not seen in 10 years. In those 10 years, I had no desire to revisit this movie until it was scheduled on my review list. So with that in mind, let's talk about the third installment of the Mummy trilogy, but not before a little history first. So, in regards to where everyone stood on the development of a third film, director Stephen Sommers said the following: "There is a demand for it, but most of the gang will only be up for it again if we could find a way to make it bigger and better." With that, he went to work on Van Helsing, yet still expressed doubts that the project would ever get off the ground. However, by late 2005, he reviewed a script with the antagonist being a Chinese emperor. With that, things sort of clumsily came together, and some things fell apart. Odette Fair and Rachel Weisz were not attached to the project. Fair's character of Ardeth Bay, being a character native to Egypt, was not exactly fit for a story like this, despite the fact that he battled the freaking Scorpion King. Weisz's reason for leaving the project was never fully confirmed, but it said that she didn't like the script, and considering that the script is the worst part of the movie, I'm not surprised. That said, Brendan Fraser and John Hannah were returning, with Jet Li and Michelle Yeoh a part of the cast as well. It's also important to note that Freddie Both, who played Rick and Evie's son in the second movie, would be recast due to the passing of time in the universe. It was also announced that director Rob Cohen, who previously directed the first Fast and Furious movie, which was a big success for Universal, was signed on to direct the movie, with it arriving in theaters in the summer of 2008. Despite doing okay at the box office, doing worse than the previous two, the movie was a critical flop, sporting a 13% on Rotten Tomatoes. The consensus reads as follows: with middling CG effects and a distinct lack of fun, The Mummy: Tomb of the Dragon Emperor finds the series past its prime. Okay, there are a few things wrong with that consensus, but I'll get back to that later. With it being over 15 years since this movie's release, has it gained a new light? TBH, got no real place to go now. So, let's just face this thing head. This is The Mummy: Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. Cursed by a devious sorceress, played by Michelle Yeoh, China's ruthless dragon emperor, played by Jet Li, and his vast army lie buried in clay for millennia. When young archaeologist Alex O'Connell, played by Luke Ford, is tricked into reviving the emperor, he and his famous parents, played by Brendan Fraser and Maria Bello, must find a way to send the ghoul back to the grave before he can awaken his vast army and take over the world. Of course. Okay, 10 years ago, a younger me didn't appreciate this movie even at a time where I thought something like Batman and Robin was good. For that time, I've always dismissed this as being an underwhelming successor to the first two films, one of which is on my list of favorite action films. However, I finally revisited it recently, so it is now fresh in my mind. And I'm going to be completely honest, this movie isn't that bad. Okay, it's not good per se, but it's far from terrible, and I genuinely had a good time watching it. The writing is terrible, yes, but there are some shining moments in there as well. Overall, I had a good time watching it, and I don't regret my decision to check it out. So, what made this movie a decent time for me? Well, let's find out. Honestly, my favorite character in this movie is Rick O'Connell. Now, don't get me wrong, he's way better in the previous two films than he is in this one. But that being said, he was the most interesting out of all of the characters. Brendan still oozes with charisma as Rick, despite being 10 years older filming this than he was back during the original filming of the original movie.
All of his jokes made me laugh, and I constantly thought that I was watching the same franchise with him being involved. Kudos to Brendan for making this poor script work. Now, as far as the other characters go, to be honest, I really like this new actor for Alex. He kinda reminds me of a younger Han Solo or Indiana Jones. As a matter of fact, Disney, if you're considering an Indiana Jones prequel, cast Luke Ford. Not only does he coincidentally have the same last name as Harrison Ford, but he'd make a damn good Indiana Jones. What's distracting about his character, however, is that he now, for some reason, has an American accent. I don't know why, but it is distracting since the previous film established him as full-on English. Whatever, I enjoyed seeing Alex whenever he was on screen. I also like Jonathan. He's not as good as he was in the previous two films, but he still delivered some funny jokes, and I also like that he opened a nightclub named after Imhotep. Okay, now let's address the elephant in the room. Maria Bello as Evie. Okay, I'm going to be completely honest here. She's not Rachel Weisz. She's not going to ever be Rachel Weisz. But, and it pains me to say this, I don't mind the recast. Yes, it is distracting. Yes, she's inferior. However, she stuck true to the character from beginning to end, and that's all that really mattered to me. I'm usually not a fan of recasts, but this is one I can honestly get past. It's not that big a deal. Still, don't get me wrong, she's never going to be the Evie I knew and loved for 10 years. Now, let's move on to the new characters. Right off the bat, I don't give two flying downs about Ziyuan and her daughter Lin. Lin was just a bad character and a plot device. The performance from Isabella Leong was straight up awful, but maybe that's just due to the poor direction and a bad script. Seriously, this is such a nothing character. As far as Ziyuan goes, despite the fact that Michelle Yeoh was a great actress, even she couldn't save this character from being straight up boring and ridiculous. Seriously, when she died, I didn't care, because the movie didn't give her enough screen time. The writing choices they made with these two were also awful. Look, I can buy that Lin is Ziyuan's daughter, but to be the 2,000-year-old daughter of Ziyuan and the former general of the Emperor's army who died was so convenient and ridiculous that it didn't mean anything at all to me. There's no interaction between Lin and the ghost of her father anyways, which really made that whole choice pointless. What I'm trying to say here is that if you cut these two out, then it would have been so much better. Seriously, these two are some of the worst characters in this entire movie. Moving on to Mad Dog McGuire, he barely does anything, and is just there. He reminded me a lot of Izzy from The Mummy Returns, where he and Rick clearly have history, but there's no time dedicated to that. I don't understand why Benny Gabor is the only character like this that worked. Whatever the case may be, I'm disappointed with a lot of the new characters. Now we move on to the villains. For the living villain, we have General Yang, who just reminded me of Baltus Hafez or Loch Na, only far less entertaining than either of them. Enough said. Now for our titular villain. The Dragon Emperor, or Han, is a good villain on paper. In fact, he was pretty intimidating whenever he was on screen. However, there are things I thought were way too much in regards to his powers. See, Imhotep had the ability to summon the plagues of Egypt, regenerate by sucking the life essence from his victims, and control environments with his powers. This guy, on the other hand, can turn into some sort of monstrous beast that walks on all fours, and a three-headed dragon. If he was just like Imhotep, albeit with more powerful abilities, I would have enjoyed him a lot more. But as it stands, his powers were way too goofy for my sense of the imagination. The point I'm trying to make is that the Dragon Emperor is a good idea on paper, but a failure in execution. So, with all of that said, I can confidently say that most of the characters are just okay, with the exception of 3 of them. Moving on to the effects, some of them look great, such as the terracotta version of the Dragon Emperor, which is the design I really liked, and the environments look beautiful, such as Shangri-La. But others look so unfinished. This dragon thing and the weird funny beast, whatever it's called, that the Dragon Emperor transforms into, look awful and unfinished. as do the Yetis. Last week, I praised Hellboy 2: The Golden Army for its effects, #shameless plug. And it sucks that this came out the same summer because these just look so unfinished. I'm sorry, I can't say much more. Now, moving on to the score. I have to say Randy Edelman did a pretty good job. He made the music very exciting, fitting, and actually kinda beautiful. When there's a score to a not-so-great movie that turns out so good, then you know that the composer really cares about the job. Finally, there's the action, which is my favorite aspect. I think that all of the action scenes are great. That chase scene in Shanghai was my favorite of the bunch, with the battle at the Himalayan temple being a close second. Even the rest of the action isn't as good as those two scenes, though. But I must say that they were all, at the very least, extremely excited and helped me have a good time. Enough said. So, overall, despite the fact that it's the weakest of the trilogy, The Mummy Tomb of the Dragon Emperor isn't actually that bad. It's a very fun and energetic little popcorn flick that I can actually see myself watching again. Sure, the script is terrible, some of the characters aren't great, and the effects are hit or miss, but the music is great and the action is entertaining as all hell. I have to say, the critics' consensus for this movie saying it lacks excitement is nonsense. This movie is very exciting, and had me excited from beginning to end. I won't watch it as much as I watched the previous two movies, but I see this as a brand new guilty pleasure. I give it a 7 out of 10.
Well, that's it for a 10-year-long redemption story. That's all I have for this movie. Let's see what else there is to see next week. Perhaps a remake of a classic. Whatever the case may be, and with that said, my name is Mr. CCS, these are my pets, this is Movie Central, and that, my friends, is